Good afternoon. So our panel, we're going to do it slightly different than we did this morning, just to keep us all on our toes. So I get to introduce Professor Julie Marsh, who's going to frame the conversation for us and talk for a little bit. And then I'm going to bring the panelists up, and then we're going to have a conversation around these sort of issues for the student experience in schools, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I get to start us off then by introducing Professor Julie Marsh, who's a professor here of education policy at the School of Education. She is an expert on K-12 policy and governance and has studied the impact of a lot of different policies on practice, everything from No Child Left Behind to teacher evaluation policy, school turnarounds, a lot of different curricular efforts. And she's currently running a large funded study of Los Angeles, New Orleans, and Denver. Julie has been at USC since 2010, and prior to that was at Rand. And she is the faculty director of the Policy Analysis for California Education, PACE, I think is what we call it. And they've done a big report called Getting Down to Facts that outlines some of the key problems that we face in the state in education from the pre-K to 12 system. And Professor Marsh is going to come up here and outline some of those key problems that then we'll sort of talk about all together. So please, Professor Marsh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Gary, thanks for including me. So as Christine said, I'm going to just give us an overview of what we know about California. And this is coming from Getting Down to Facts, which was sort of a national collaborative effort of over 100 researchers from both within and outside of the state. The actual endeavor involved something like, 36 research studies, 19 research briefs. It was almost a 2-year endeavor. And it came almost a decade after Getting Down to Facts 1, which was a similar kind of effort that actually ended up sort of predating and leading to some of the reforms that we've now have in place in the state right now. And so this was sort of meant as sort of a taking stock of where we are, how those reforms have taken hold and not, and what's been the impact and where is sort of the need right now. And we released these studies at the end of the year, and we've been doing a lot more sort of going around the state in the beginning of the year because there was a window of opportunity with the new governor, state superintendent of instruction, legislators, and whatnot. So this is meant to sort of provide the facts for policymakers to sort of understand, like, where do we need to go next as a state? Okay, so how are we doing? And I should say that I think on the tables is a summary report, and there's also a website at the bottom here. And if you went to there, you'll find a great depth in terms of all of those reports and all of the details. I'm going to give us a high-level sort of overview of the findings. But basically what we find is that California's pre-K education system is really moving in the right direction, but there's actually a lot more we need to do if we really want to develop that sort of pathway for opportunity for all students regardless of where they live. So my plan is to start broad, give us a big picture of some of the findings from this research, and then I'm going to go deep into one policy reform that I've been intimately involved in studying, which is the local control funding formula. Okay, so the findings from the PACE report. So one of the things is that we've experienced a ton of change in California. There's been a new accountability system, new standards, new performance metrics. We've also gotten this new finance system that allocates funding differently, and I'll go into that in a little bit. And there's just essentially very broad buy-in for these reforms. We've seen results. There's been some improvements. We've seen increasing student performance on national assessments, which I'll show in a bit, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So the 3 areas that the research shows where we need more work, one has to do with building the capacity to implement some of these reforms. The second is that we need to think about some ways to increase funding and fix some of the issues that weren't really taken up by this new finance system. And then the third one has to do with achievement gaps. Okay, so in terms of implementation, in a lot of the studies that we did, there was this sense that more capacity building is necessary. So for example, in terms of standards, a lot of the educators around the state are reporting that they're finding it difficult to access and find quality materials that are aligned to the new standards and sort of knowing how to make these choices. Districts are having some questions around how to allocate resources. Not all districts have access to sort of support in their region to help build the knowledge and skills that they need to make some of these reforms happen. In terms of information, we have limited data. So for example, we don't have a lot of data on early childhood education in the state. In the K-12 area, we don't have the ability to link to higher education data, so there's very little ability to sort of understand long-term effects. And then in terms of the state, CDE, the California Department of Education, they're quite limited in their capacity as well. So for example, around instruction, they have a very small staff devoted to instructional improvement. So there's some huge capacity needs. The second area has to do with finance. So we've seen increases in the funding over the past 10 years. We've recovered from the sort of recession, but research shows that funding still remains quite inadequate. And I mean that by many different measures. So various people cite different numbers and statistics to compare how per pupil funding. But in this one of the reports, we show that the school revenue per pupil in California is substantially actually, it's above Florida. It's about on par with Texas and Ohio, but it's lower than Illinois, and it's substantially lower than many northeastern states, particularly New York, for example. Another study, they did a professional sort of judgment panel. So they gathered a whole bunch of folks together who are experts in the field to say, what would it take to actually provide an education that would achieve the state's goals? And what they found was that we would have to get an additional 38% of what we're actually spending in order to make sure that all students had the opportunity to meet the goals that we've set as a state. And then finally, because of our low funding and because of the high salaries that we have in California, we have far fewer adults in our schools than most other states. So we rank at the bottom of all states in terms of the percent of school students with access to various types of health and mental health supports. Our adult-child ratio is nearly at the bottom of all states when we look at teachers, nurses, counselors, and mental health professionals. And about 3/4 of our districts, there was a study in this collection of research that asked districts about their hiring, and we looked at administrative data, right? Teacher openings. 3/4 of the districts have teacher openings that they can't fill, and those shortages are even greater in particular subfields, right? So special education, math, science, also in rural areas and in higher poverty urban areas. And then finally, LCFF did a lot of change, but it didn't address two really important things. So one has to do with the pension system, and I recommend you look at Corey Codell's analysis of this. But the pension system is drawing substantial funds away from schools' operating budgets. And what it's requiring then is increases in contributions that teachers are paying, districts are paying, and the state. And Corey estimates that if this continues, it's going to require expenditures approximately equal to 1/3 of teacher salaries by 2021. And there's been some adjustments in the governor's new budget, but it's just a short-term fix. It's not going to address this big issue. The second area is special education. California's new policy LCFF did not address it. If you're in education, you understand this is a very unpredictable, potentially very draining set of expenditures for districts. We did one of the studies did interviews with 50 chief business officers. It was one of their top 3 concerns across the state. Okay, final area that I wanted to highlight was around achievement. And I'll show you a couple slides about this. But basically, we're seeing improvement, but it's still lagging behind the nation, and we still have large gaps by race, ethnicity, income, English learner status. And these gaps are actually greater than what we see in many other states. So I'll show you one figure. This comes from Sean Reardon at Stanford, has done a really good report here and a ton of great research in this area. He and his colleagues find that while we're seeing progress, we lag behind. So this is showing us NAEP, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, which is a national assessment. He's comparing average 4th and 8th grade scores in reading, which is on the left, and I believe math is on the right. And what he's showing us is California in the white line, and the yellow line is the nation. And so if you look, he's done this for 2 decades, and so in the far left, the gap was much wider. It was almost a full, more than 1 grade level behind California when you compare our scores to the nation. It's closed, but we're still lagging behind. And it's not the case for all districts. It's actually in particular districts. So the disparity is actually the greatest and concentrated in districts that are either average in terms of their income of the students or very disadvantaged. So in these kind of non-affluent districts, California scores nearly a full grade level behind the national average. And I suggest you look at their report. They look at other statistics like suspensions and the state tests, and they see very similar kinds of gaps. Another figure that I could help us illustrate some of the need has to do with college readiness. So McCall Kurlander and her colleagues up at UC Davis have been doing some really great work looking at college readiness and a whole set of indicators. This one is just looking at 11th grade scores on the Smarter Balanced Assessment, which is a standardized test. And what it's showing us is, overall, this isn't showing us, but overall they find only 30% of 11th graders are meeting the kind of college readiness standards in math and English language arts. But this is showing us actually the gaps by various subgroups. So red means you've met college readiness standards in both math and English language arts. Green is that you've only done it in English language arts, and then yellow is math. And blue is that you have not met the standards in either. And you can see that those blue bars are much larger for Black and Latinx students. Those are the two middle columns. And they show this too for lower income students, for English learners, that there is this sort of very distinct pattern in terms of college readiness based on these achievement results. Okay, and then I guess the last thing I wanted to say about the outcomes is that we can say that part of these inequities and the issues that we're seeing might be due to what's going on in K-12 schools. So for example, Linda Darling-Hammond and some of her colleagues have been looking at the credentials of teachers, and we're seeing that schools serving less advantaged students have more difficulty filling teacher positions, right? So they have fewer experienced, fewer fully licensed teachers and administrators in their districts. But not all of the achievement issues that we're seeing can be attributed to K-12. And again, Sean Reardon's work shows this very clearly, that the gaps often start before kindergarten. And so you can see that low-income students in California lag behind their counterparts at kindergarten entry, which suggests that there's something going on in our in the early childhood education system. Deborah Stipek at Stanford and a number of her colleagues have been doing there's a ton of work if you go on the Getting Down to Facts website that looks at what's going on in this area. And just to give you a flavor, Black and Latinx children and dual language learners are less likely to have attended preschool compared to white children. Child care workers in California receive very low wages and benefits. 58% depend on at least one form of public income support. Children from low-income families are more likely to have child care that is license exempt. And the system overall has very little oversight and very little emphasis on quality. So there's suggested that if we really want to tackle this issue, we need to think very broadly beyond just K-12. And then let me go deep into this one area that you might consider a sort of more innovative reform that's been put in place with very explicit equity goals. So the Governor Brown signed this into law in 2013 with an understanding that students with greater academic needs required additional resources in order to sort of be fair and just. So this is a very significant reform that's been in place for some time now. And what it intended to do, this is sort of the theory of action. This is the way I like to sort of deconstruct policies. If you start at the left, these were the four main components of the policy, and then it sort of traces us sort of what were the assumptions of how this was going to lead us to improvement. So there were four things. One, it provided additional money, so in the form of concentration and supplemental grants. Districts got additional money for every child that was low-income, English learner, or foster youth. Number two, it eliminated a lot of the categorical programs and provided much more flexibility to local leaders. So rather than legislators deciding where money should go, local boards and administrators could decide how to allocate their resources. Number three, you had to develop a local plan that was going to illustrate how you were going to use these funds and achieve better outcomes, and you had to have input from local community members, educators, and in some cases students for older grades. And then the final thing is around a sort of an accountability. You had to put together a local control and accountability plan. It was going to be monitored, and then there would be some sense that over time, with outcomes that we would see on this new dashboard, there might be interventions and support provided to districts that are not achieving their goals or not doing well on these metrics. Oh, sorry. So then, again, that would lead us to, the assumption was that with the kind of collection of those key mechanisms would lead us to more coherent, equity kind of oriented services and programs, which would ultimately lead us to better outcomes. And then that loop, that black arrow at the bottom, again, is that point I just made, which is that based on how you're doing, you might get additional support to help you maybe adjust your policies, maybe adjust your programs to kind of get better outcomes. So one of the things that we've been doing as a group, I'm part of a collaborative of researchers around the state, is we've been examining to what extent is this playing out as intended? How is this working? And so in getting down to facts, there were a number of studies that were done both by this collaborative and some additional researchers. And the answer really is yes and no in terms of is this playing out as intended? One of the things is we see that the money is actually going to these districts based on the higher needs. The funding system for a while has actually provided more money to low-income students, but we're seeing that since LCFF, that revenue advantage has grown. Superintendents, chief business officers, the public are very supportive of the equity assumptions in here that students with greater needs should be given additional resources. And districts are grateful for the flexibility that they're getting. We have surveys and case study data that show that district leaders are saying that they're changing the way they actually allocate resources because of this flexibility. More than 3/4 of superintendents said that LCFF is leading to greater alignment between their needs and their goals, that LCFF is enabling them to kind of rethink their budget priorities, and that districts are making investments in ways that are really improving the services and programs for those targeted students. But the enthusiasm is really tempered by deep concerns about inadequacy of resources. And so over and over again in our visits to these districts and on surveys, they're saying pension costs, special education, healthcare benefits, all of these things are really limiting their ability to do as much as they really think is needed. And then in terms of outcomes, there is some evidence. Sean Tanner and Rutger Johnson have been doing some really interesting work in high school, looking at high school data, and they've seen some outcome positive impact. So a $1,000 increase in district per pupil spending experienced by students in these upper grades, so grades 10 through 12, led to a 5.9 percentage point increase in high school graduation rates. And they're finding actually even the strongest results are for African American students. They also looked at test results. So a $1,000 increase in district per pupil spending in the ages when kids are 13 to 16 led to average increase in 11th grade math test scores equivalent to about 7 months of learning. Again, I would recommend that you go to their report so you can see their methodology. So this is preliminary data, and it's just at the high school level. And then finally, in terms of that mechanism of engaging community, which is something that I've been very involved in, we're seeing widespread challenges around how that happens. And so I'll just give you a little flavor for what we've been doing, and then I'll stop talking. So we've been doing work for 3 years following we total have gone to 27 districts. We've done over 350 interviews. We've done surveys with superintendents. We've done public opinion polling on this. And overall, what we're finding in terms of this local engagement mechanism in LCFF is that the districts are complying with the letter of this law, but not necessarily the spirit of democratic engagement. And I'll say more about what I mean by that. So there's support for this. There's widespread support. More than 3/4 of superintendents agree that involving the community ensures that district goals and strategies align with local needs, that gives historically underrepresented students and families a voice in this process and opportunities to influence district decisions. And they're making really good faith efforts to do the work, to actually bring a wide group of people together, including educators and community members, in a lot of cases students. 48% of superintendents said that they have students involved in developing their plans. And they're trying multiple strategies. They're doing meetings, advisory groups, they're doing surveys. But what we know is that the participation levels are very low. So on our survey, on the poll that we did of statewide registered voters, we found 5% had attended an LCFF-related meeting. This was in 2016. We just repeated the poll in January, and it's at 11% right now. More than half of the superintendents that we polled said that the level of engagement was average or poor in their district, that it was difficult to obtain input, particularly from the families and guardians of those targeted by these additional funds, low-income foster youth, English learners, and that the activities that they organize in their district tend to be dominated by a few voices. And despite a lot of learning that's occurred over the 3 years, we see very shallow forms of engagement. So a lot of those activities are very much about giving information or receiving input, but not a lot of that sort of two-way collaborative. And I guess the report that I have online goes into a lot more detail about what we're calling these outlier districts, where we actually did see some places that were engaging community in very deep, broad ways. And so we have a little bit of insight there on sort of what is it that they're doing that we might learn across the state. So that I'll leave you with that if you want to get more, a little teaser. And so again, if you want to go on the website, you can find more about these reports and more about that data, but I'm hoping that this might provide a little bit of framing for our conversation around education and innovation, and we'll welcome questions later. So thank you.
All right, so first I'd like to introduce Jeimee Estrada, right here to my left. Jeimee is the Regional Vice President for Innovate Public Schools, which is an organization that started in the Bay Area, and Jeimee has opened the LA office and running the office down here. She's a former student at Price and has a range of experience in education. She's a former teacher, researcher, policy, so she's got the whole gamut of experiences that we're talking about here today. She's been at Innovate Public Schools since 2013 and was the founding director of policy and research. Now, Innovate Public Schools, I'll let her talk a little bit more about it in a minute, but this is an organization whose goal is to share school models with educators to help improve local public schools. And here in LA, they're identifying top schools, they're writing data reports, they're sharing that information. They're working not only with educators, but also with parents and communities. So this is Jeimee. Thank you for joining us. And then we have Sunwoo Hwang from Sixup, who is an entrepreneur focused on the other end, the back end of our K-12 system of getting from high school to college, and that transition for first-generation immigrant students in particular, and managing that funding gap, and how do we help fund that for students. It's a very innovative organization, providing loans as a winner of a lot of different, these are some FinLab, which is the Financial Solutions Lab. It would be a FinTech company, financial technology companies, sort of where they are being funded by JP Chase and the Center for Financial Services Innovation to try and scale their model and offer more funding. But the model is to offer full-time students loans to 4-year Title IV nonprofit colleges. As I already said, generally first-generation immigrant students who are eligible for Pell Grants, but there's a gap, right? And they're trying to fill the gap with $2,500 to $15,000 a year of funding, where they're not FICO dependent and they don't require co-signers, and really looking at academic performance and demonstrated need. So a really innovative model. So let's start. I guess there's two things from Julie's comments I think I want to pick up on. One is sort of about funding and the importance of funding at different places, and the other is about stakeholder engagement. So if we start with stakeholder engagement, Jeimee, you work not just with educators, but also with parents. And what is the role of parents in local communities? How are they important to disrupting the system, and how do you engage them in this, big system in this process?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Julie, for your comments. I think there were a really great grounding in the information about where California is now. And it didn't surprise me to hear the findings on local stakeholder engagement for local control funding formula. I actually worked at the state level on the inception and the sort of movement to the local control funding formula from the perspective of a policy maker and advisor before I actually moved into organizing. And so saw the vision and the spirit of LCFF be created, which is if local communities are engaged, if parents who have the best interest of students at heart are fundamentally part of the decision-making equation, that schools and districts would better spend public dollars, right? That's essentially at the spirit of the legislation, particularly because California serves many more language learners, many more students of color than many places, in particular here in LA County. And so parents are absolutely crucial. I think the way that we see the role of parents in engaging, especially policies like LCFF, but what makes effective schools is that parents are engaged as decision makers and local leaders. What can oftentimes happen in engaging community is there will be like one stakeholder meeting or even a series of stakeholder meetings which have happened under LCFF. But in order for people to really understand the complexity of our education system, how public dollars should be allocated, it requires a deep investment in those individuals. I think going back to David's points during lunch around that meeting folks around where their passion is and then building their skills as parent leaders to engage as decision makers in their school. and also just even at a district-wide level. What you can see oftentimes if you're on the parent engagement side of things, especially for low-income families, what happens is like there is movement on a legislation or movement and decision that needs to happen at a school, but rather than having a core group of leaders that have been invested in over time, what you'll see is mobilization efforts, right? How many parents can we get out to this one march? How many parents can we get to this one meeting? Rather than like a deep investment, more of like an organizing model of investment of how are parents a key partner and a decision maker in the schoolhouse. And that's how we work with parents. We work with parents on a place-based model, meaning we choose particular neighborhoods where we know that there are very large educational disparities, issues to be addressed. And we meet parents where there are in terms of where their passion is. Parents and students can't essentially wait for us to come up with the 5-year strategic plan, right? They can't wait for school to dramatically change over a course of 5 years. Parents need excellent schools now, and engaging parents at that passion level, you actually find very deep investments of parents that will get engaged and become part of their community. So what we have brought into the education space in the regions where we work is essentially an organizing model. You invest in a core group of leaders who is connected to other parents in that school, and you bring them in as decision makers. It's essentially parents as co-educators. You equip them with the right skills, the right information, and they have the heart to be able to engage. And when we've done that work in the Bay Area, where we've been around for 5 years, we find that our parent leaders engage for multiple years across several different issues that they care about. Actually, some of the parent leaders that we've invested in have gone on to run for school board, get involved in PTA committees beyond just like the typical like come into the school once a week, but really get deeply invested into the community. So I think that is one of the key pieces that's missing, even though LCFF is a wonderful move in terms of equity and ensuring that there's more resources put into communities that really need them. But essentially how parents are engaged as organized leaders of community that are part of systems change is one of the things that we bring to the work.
Terrific. So Julie, I'm going to follow up with you on that just because we're talking about this stakeholder engagement, and you had mentioned at the end these outlier districts. Can you give us an example of places where you think things are working well?
Yeah, not to name them, but to sort of say, what did we see across the group? And it's interesting is that some of them are ones that have worked with an outside organization, right? So there's something to this idea of partnering with some kind of intermediary organization that actually help build district administrators' capacity to actually do this, right? Because district administrators are tasked with lots of different things and not necessarily very skilled in understanding how to bring out a diverse group of stakeholders, but also how to engage people in very culturally relevant, sensitive ways. And so I think that one of the things that we did consistently see in our outliers, which is they had a partner that helped them bring people in to build this capacity that you're talking about, Jeimee, in terms of educating parents and community members with the data and the information that they needed to actually come to the table and actually participate as equals. So that would be one. The second thing that I think we found was a lot of these places have been working with, they have a history. They've done strategic planning. They had leadership that have been very invested in this. And so there was this level of trust that was already developed. And that's, of course, a hard one to sort of enact on scale, right? Because you have to develop that over time. But in several of these places, one of the key areas happened to be relational trust between the union and the district. So it was not just about sort of community members, but also the teachers association, the administrators association. So there's issues around organizational capacity to do this well, and they had partners. They had built community capacity because they had these community-based organizations available. Like some worked with Pico and faith-based organizations that really know how to do the work that Jaimee's talking about. But they have also had sort of a history of trust and strong kind of relationships. And really had thought very deeply about how to do this in a meaningful, not just a token way to sort of say like, okay, we've got our, check the box, we've actually met as a group.
So I'll turn it a little bit, but keep on this theme of partnerships, Sunwoo. So you've come into creating a market that was certainly underserved, if not non-existent. What are the partnerships and the collaborations that you've had to build as you sort of move into this sort of an existing system, but creating this new model?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I will say we're not creating any market. The market actually has been there forever. It's just been focused upon and frankly discarded. And at a high level, which really sets the framework for why partnerships were crucial for our go-to-market, as well as really just trying to make this solution a reality. In the US, there are roughly 7 million high-achieving low-income students that are working hard, gaining admission into four-year institutions. After heavy investment, work, value in the K-12 space, whether through Innovate or organizations like KIPP and Crystal Ray, or TRIO programs, or college access success organizations like Genesis Works. And they're not all getting into Harvard, Stanford on the far right of the bell curve, which is roughly 0.05% of the 7 million. So most of the kids are like me and many of our team who get into great four-year public-private institutions, but those don't all have a $40 billion endowment like Stanford to give every single kid a full ride. So they face an out-of-pocket gap of $5,000 to $15,000. So in aggregate, if you pick the middle of 10, that's a $70 billion problem. It's not a market we created. It's a market that right now students are facing where they either forego the opportunity to attend those better schools they worked so hard to get into, simply because of lack of access to credit and funding, or B, they go to school like I did at Northwestern and work 9 jobs to pay my $12,000 gap while I'm going full-time pre-med econ, which that financial stress creates heavy academic stress. And so what we did is say, if we come up with a solution to fill that gap with responsible, affordable loans, and to do it without a cosigner or a FICO, and we can get the capital to power the investment of that money into these deserving students. The real question on the front end was our initial partners were, how are we going to find the students without going into every single high school manually and trying to find who's high achieving, who's low income, and what have you. So that's when a lot of the organizations I mentioned earlier were crucial to our go-to-market when we first started. Now the challenge for us is that you don't get to walk into a KIPP or a Genesis Works and say, hey, we're Sixup and we want to help your kids. They're very protective of their kids, as they should be. So they spent a lot of time vetting us and really making sure, oh, so you're non-predatory, you're one of the good guys and good gals. We've never seen anyone come up with a solution like yours, and we desperately need your help because all this work we're doing in K-12 and increasing success at the high school graduation rate levels, at the college admission levels, we feel that we don't have the capacity to solve this funding gap, which means all that work generally can then send those kids back down into the holes that I worked so desperately to get out of as a child of a first-generation immigrant father from Korea. So that was really great for both, not only getting a pipeline of students, which in California, that pipeline is coming. I mean, 6 million students here, K through 12, over half are economically disadvantaged. If the LCFF work starts to bear the fruit that it's supposed to, as it seems to indicate on the early data, we want to be ready to set up to carry that torch forward. So, you know, that, though it wasn't just pipeline, also was credibility of market. It's really important as you go out to the market and the institutions want to know, who are you working with? Oh, you're working with TRIO, you're working with KIPP, you're working with these great organizations, and credibility is really crucial to continue catalyzing the community, leveraging the community and all the work and effort that's going on. So partners are, we continue to strive forward with partners. On the capital front, besides JP Morgan Chase, we've had great organizations like Rockefeller Foundation, Kellogg Foundation, and now Goldman Sachs really lean in and try to help make sure that we can get this solution to market, because it's a massive problem, but there's massive impact to be made if we can continue scaling to fund this deserving population.
So thank you. So you spoke really well about sort of why these loans are so important to these students, right? They're getting Pell Grants, but that's really not enough to cover the cost and holding multiple jobs and the challenges that brings to their college experience. So I'm thinking, going back into the sort of parents and the conversations that you have with kids and parents and their families, what are some of the assumptions around loans and debt and how they should think about taking on loans and as they navigate this process? What are some of the conversations that you need to have with students and families? What do people understand?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'll start with a really cool metric that we are very excited about seeing, but also having gone through the problem ourselves, we know the meaning of it. When we approve a student through our underwriting, which takes into account what institution they're attending or seeking funding for, what their grades are, their time to graduation, their debt-to-income ratio based on their declared major. We really look at their performance metrics, which are much more meaningful and predictive of whether or not they're going to pay off a loan than a cosigner or FICO. In fact, a cosigner is really more of an insurance policy If you co-sign my loan and I don't pay the lender back, then you pay them back. So they don't really care where you go to school and what your grades are. And so, you know, when we underwrite them, when we approve them, the acceptance rate of them taking the money from us, we don't tell them they have to, we just want to give them the option, is above 90%. So it's a super high conversion rate. That tells you these students really want the money and or they don't want to put on credit cards. We see a lot of upper class students putting on credit cards. That's their only access to credit. In fact, in addition to my 9 jobs at Northwestern, my senior year, I was scrambling to kind of get that last set of money to be able to get through the graduation finish line, and I put it on a credit card. And so going back from there, yes, there's a lot of work that we do around the fear around student lending and student loans. Student loan is a big bubble, 1.5 trillion, student loans are bad, all these nightmare stories of students graduating with heavy debt and no outcomes. Well, you know, we do a couple things structurally, like we don't fund for-profit predatory institutions, unlike the federal government. A lot of our money goes to fund low-income students to go to those institutions where they're pretty much guaranteed the default, okay? So we won't fund them. So we can educate people that, you know, you want to, if you do take out a loan, make sure you fund it to a good school. I think the other thing is that because we're not doing transactional lending where it's just interest rate and cosign or FICO, we're actually taking a bet on that student. We're aligned with their success. So structurally, it's just a very different relationship. It's like a venture capital firm investing in our company saying, we're going to give you money, but we believe in you, but also your success is our success, so we want to help you. Therefore, that's why we care what schools these students attend. We care that they're doing well academically. We don't want them to be under heavy financial stress. So we're having to change some of the perspectives and structure of the loan product itself and design it accordingly. I think the third thing is certainly, you know, this notion of this is probably one of the more challenging aspects of what we've been doing over the last 4 years. We're in our 5th year, which I can't believe. So there's kind of 2 camps in the ecosystem around, and we know this from many of the partners that we work with in the K-12 space, but also National College Access Network. Kim Cook, for example, executive director, she said, it took me a while to understand your model. Now that I understand it, wow, this is really powerful, and finally, this is the right way to fund this population. But here's the deal. I know what you're challenged with in the ecosystem because half the counselors in our field sternly advise our students to never take out loans. Just go to the school you can afford. We just don't believe in loans. Whereas the other half says, well, but that doesn't make any sense because then you're going to send every single low-income kid to either a community college or a lesser selective school than they worked so hard to get into, which they should deserve to go to the more selective school. There's nothing wrong with 2-year community colleges. Our focus as a company is to help the students that are undermatching, and we want to upmatch them or upfund them, if you will. So, you know, rather than resigning and giving up and saying, well, we can't find a funding solution, just no loans, go to the school you can afford, and the other camp saying, well, we don't want them to have predatory loans and take on bad debt, we kind of live in the middle around more smart debt, tied to outcomes, thinking about investing in better pathways, better outcomes, and really lifting this deserving population of students into not social mobility, but upward mobility. Because where you go to school has a direct impact on your lifetime median income, direct impact on your graduation rates by orders of magnitude. In California, 3.0 GPA and up. If you are going to start at a 2-year community college relative to start at a 4-year institution, graduation rates can be better, 3x, if you go to the 4-year institution. And the likelihood you're going to default on a federal loan, this is data that a lot of people don't think about, know about. If you think about going to a 2-year community college and a 4-year institution, as you climb up the curve from 2-year to 4-year, if you have the opportunity to fill that gap, the default rate can improve 6x, meaning if you go down the curve, it increases 6x that you're going to default on your loan. So there's a lot of stuff going on that a lot of people don't know about. It's hard to talk about that. Look how long it's taken me to talk to you all about that. But we have to live in those nuances. We have to be better at marketing that. We have to better to pivot from the fear-based propaganda. And one thing I like to talk about is there were 2 industries, one hospitality and one transportation, and 2 companies came along and took the same industry, but they transformed it into something new. And those are Airbnb and Uber and Lyft. Lyft just went IPO this morning, apparently. But we're kind of doing a similar thing of transforming transactional student lending that sucks and is scary to ones that are investing on an outcomes-based model into pathways to better opportunity. So but that's going to take some time, and we're patient about that. That's why we've been at this in our 5th year.
Terrific. Thank you. All right, so to step back, we need to have these high-achieving students. that then can get into these colleges, and Sixup can help them with their funding gap. So you are working a lot with schools in areas, redesigning existing schools and creating new schools to help advance opportunity and solve some of the problems that these schools have been facing and that Julie talked about earlier. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways you do that and some of the ways you can sort of deal with the big barriers that these students in these schools are facing?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to start, I think at the perspective of information and research, the power of looking at outliers in education is, it can't be celebrated more. Because what we find in looking at outliers in schools that are achieving more than they are expected to achieve, based on all of the neighborhood data we saw earlier today, right? We can see what are some pathways to solutions, and we can sort of disrupt what is typically expected of schools that have significant numbers of challenges. Right, so starting there, for example, in Los Angeles County, of the 2,000 schools that are in LA County, we've looked at a subset of those schools that are serving a high proportion of low-income Latino students, low-income African-American students. In the future, looking at other underserved subgroups. What of those schools are the outliers? Which ones are actually, with all of the challenges that schools face today, making it possible to get 80% of their kids ready for four-year universities? Who are those outliers and what are they doing, and what can we learn from them? Given that we know that policy change and resource change takes a long time. So while all of those things are happening, those currents of statewide policy change, what can we do with educators now to learn from those disruptors, from those innovators that are with current resources making it happen? So in LA County, out of over 2,000 schools, there are 279 schools that are closing the achievement gap for low-income kids of color. 279. That's not 5, that's not 10, that's a lot. Like, we know it's possible, right? We know it's possible, and we've seen it over the course of the years nationally that closing achievement gaps and getting students to these really high levels that would then, we need the extra jump to really get them into higher education, that it's possible for that to happen. We know it's possible, but now it's about digging deeply into those schools and learning about what they're doing. We know design matters, so really thinking about this redesign of existing schools, how organizations function, and how a school leader and teachers work together to build an effective team that can take the really complex thing, which is learning. Teaching and learning is a complex craft, that can take it and move it to the next level based on the technology that we have today, based on understanding evidence-based practices of what's happened in the past. This is what we do with schools. We say, like, let's redesign your school based on the needs of your community and with your community. And that can happen in both district schools and in charter schools. And so we work with both. And I'll give one example of that. One of the things you'll find in California is that bilingual schools are mostly targeted in middle to more affluent income communities, right? So it's because people understand the value of having a second or a third language. And those schools tend to be targeted in neighborhoods where parents are looking for them, even moving next to a school that might be dual immersion. Actually, dual immersion and bilingual education is one of the most effective ways to addressing the language gap that students can come into schools with, right? So students learning in their native language actually helps them. And this is a research-based practice. It's not an innovation. But what you see innovative educators doing, and what we support them to do, is to actually take that and put it in a community where it's most needed, meaning make it a dual immersion school that is innovative and new and builds an effective team in a community where that is actually needed. So where we have 90% of students, for example, in Westlake Pico Union, 75% of students enter the system as language learners. However, there are very few schools in that area that have bilingual education as part of their core educational model, right? So we look at from the needs of a place, and we help educators redesign schools to make them better, to achieve these better results. And really, it's about opening up our learning, right? So typically in really effective schools, what you'll see is that classrooms are open, meaning teachers go to one another's classrooms. Parents can come in to see how their kids are learning. Effective schools have learning communities where teachers are working together, collaborating, and people are seeing excellence because excellence is happening in the school and they're learning from one another. We need to make that happen with principals and multiple schools. What are our most excellent schools in the region? Going back to the 279 schools closing the achievement gap, who are those schools? How can we learn from them? How do we know who they are? And how do we get principals, both in the district and charter sector, learning from one another? And that's fundamentally part of our work, to move more schools to these schools that are achieving better results.
Terrific. So actually I have one question for all of you. Sort of, what's the toughest problem that you're facing, that you're trying to solve? Like, there's a lot going on here, right? You've got a lot of different constituencies. So can I start with you, Sonya? Where would you say, what's your toughest challenge?
Do we have a couple hours?
Yeah.
It was a very big, ambitious summit that we set our sights on in 2015 when we started. And we had a lot of people say this Sixup thing's not going to work out. Low-income students just have a strong propensity to drop out and or default on federal loans. And we kind of laughed at them and said, yeah, that's funny. We've seen the same data too. Do you know why? If you go down one level, because they can't go to the better schools as their high-income peers. They're working 9 jobs. They're going part-time. They're helping support families at home. I said, yeah, we've seen the same data, so we're going to change that data. So why don't you get out of the way? We're going to go forward. But I think the challenge we had was getting capital. I think we certainly had a lot of alignment with folks in the ecosystem that were working with the population, realizing that we've got to figure out a way to help the life cycle of the student journey, all the way from K through 12 to higher education. More importantly, not graduation. Graduation is not the goal. The goal is job creation and wealth creation. That's what we're focused on. And then you really hit those mobility metrics that allow these students to break generational poverty, to help their students and families, reinvest in their communities, and actually reinvest back in our system or any other system to help lift the next generation. Because we're creating balance sheets. I mean, we're creating mobility that really helps lift up families. That's what I did and was able to do simply because my father sacrificed everything to come to the United States and raise 3 boys. So capital was really difficult. We were fortunate enough to be able to align with and access capital partners that were willing to come in early, because there's a stigma associated with subprime, low income. So the capital markets or funders say, well, you know, this is great, it seems pretty interesting, but these are still really risky kids, right? Risky and kind of a lot of problems. I said, no, these are winners. And so it took us a while to figure out a way to reframe the narrative from these kids of 7 million I talked about earlier need about 10,000. They get lumped into subprime, and the capital markets prime, subprime. And as you've seen movies like The Big Short, subprime, bad, bad, bad. Well, no, there's a lot of great stuff in subprime. It's just no one's been able to figure out who the winners are, pull them out, recharacterize them, and reposition them in the market as future prime. And so we were trademarking and branding this population as winners, right? So once we did that, that's when folks like Goldman and Prudential and Deutsche Bank and Rockefeller and Kellogg said, we love this. This is like powerful. Now we understand what you're doing. But it wasn't just the moniker that really catalyzed it. We had to progressively stage the company over the last 4 years to graduate from sub 50,000 checks here and there from a family office to launch in Texas. As we grew from Texas 12 states to 18 states, we got some PRI money from foundations, program-related investments, which I won't go into, but it's special money that we're eligible for to incubate us and kind of graduate up. So it's a long, hard journey, but that was definitely the challenge, and I think we're starting to kind of crack through that. And I would say that the challenge still in persistence for us is this notion of loans are bad, investments are good. We got to work on kind of shifting that paradigm, and that is going to take some time, but we're cognizant that, you know, if you want to implement a theory of change, well, change can scare a lot of people. So we're trying to be thoughtful about that process and kind of not talk about behavioral economics, but really talk about, you know, ways to just give some instances and some stories that we're already seeing right now from students to help amplify why this is a good thing.
All right, I've gotten my cue that we moved to Q&A, but you haven't had a chance to answer the question, so I'm going to do more of a lightning round.
Sure,
okay.
I'll be pretty quick. I would say that the biggest challenge in engaging multiple sectors, meaning the district and the charter sector, multiple different stakeholders, parents, educators, and principals, I think is the leaning toward polarization of our world today. That makes it hard for people to share and connect on values level, but rather more so connect on sound bites and scandals and stories. And I think the work that we do to organize parents, but also to connect with educators and have more cross-sector learning is difficult when we are operating in more polarized ways, especially because the challenges in education are big. We have de-invested in our schools in California. Our Proposition 13 change that's coming up potentially in 2020, the need for more resources, 38% more resources just to get to our statewide goals will require a lot of values-driven conversations at the local level and at the state level, and sort of getting beyond polarization around district or charter, polarization around like being pro-teacher or anti-teacher. We need to like be pro-student, pro-kid, and connect on values. And I think that's the biggest challenge, but it's the heart of our work, is connecting folks around their heart, which is loving their children.
Terrific.
Wow,
Julie?
she just said it better than I would. I literally was going to talk about polarization, but I mean, and part of it is sort of an interest-based sort of world that we live in. And so again, if to achieve the equity goals of, let's say, LCFF, right, is sort of like at a local level, how do you convince people that they should be investing in the full community and not just advocating for their own needs and wants? And so that's sort of at a local level one of the big challenges. And then I think at a state level, right, this issue around adequacy of resources to me is fundamental. And you know, we have Prop 13, which is just a fundamental roadblock in a lot of ways, but there will be an initiative on the ballot coming up that might be able to adjust some of the taxes that we have on commercial and business. I think that's an opportunity, but how do we convince people to invest more in everybody and every kid in this state in a way that then, I guess, sort of moves away from a more interest-based conception of what it means to live in a democratic society, and one that sort of accepts this understanding that we all have responsibility. And that moves away from the sort of polarized politics that are facing our country, really.
Terrific. All right, so I could keep asking these people questions forever, but I'll open it up for questions from the audience.
Hello, I'm Andrew with Los Angeles Unified School District, and kind of going on the same lines of the polarization of, I guess, the polarizing climate that we live in. What are some tactics of building trust with stakeholders that you're seeing implemented in your organizations, or you would like to see implemented?
To answer that question, I'd love to actually share a little bit about the Pico organizing model that Julie referenced, which is what we use. And the Pico organizing model is as old-time organizers like Cesar Chavez, back to Saul Alinsky, and people say that Saul Alinsky stole from Moses. Deep down, it's a model just based on relationships. So actually, I have a slide associated with that I think, I'm not sure if it visually is going to show up well. But at the heart of, I think, fighting polarization is building relationships and building authentic relationships that are meant to last. And this is the Pico organizing model, but we call it the Innovate model just because we use it in education. But it's really about listening and restoring relationships in the community, right? So it's like, how are you in community and spending time and actually allowing parent leaders, multiple stakeholders to be in a relationship with one another in authentic ways that's grounded in listening to one another. Then really we believe in any public issue, you move into learning. Right? So when you've created community, when you have gotten down to people's values and listened, I think it's really fundamentally about moving to learn to have a common understanding of the issues. A lot of, like right now, even just on the state of money in education, people have all kinds of messages. LAUSD has too much money. It's kind of saving some of it in its reserves. Oh no, LAUSD is going broke. Oh, the state's providing not enough money. There's so many mixed messages that we need common understanding amongst community. How do we learn with one another? And then moving to action based on the intensity of people's passion and values, right? What are the issues that are really moving people? And right now, I do think it's this issue of adequacy. I think that is moving people. It's moving, it moved 30,000 teachers in Los Angeles just a few weeks ago. It moved thousands of teachers in Oakland and in Denver, meaning we need to reinvest in our schools. Our kids need more money. Our teachers need to have better conditions. I believe that that's at the heart of an issue that we need to unify and build relationships around. And then it's about learning. So learning and reflecting with community, going back and debriefing. is LCFF working at our site? Is our school site council working? Right, so it's really going back to listening, learning, and acting together, all in a full circle that builds trust over time. And I would say to fight polarization, especially on issues like reinvesting in our schools and adequacy of funding, is at the heart of what we want to work on for the next couple of years.
Can I just add one idea to that? Is this notion of small wins. I remember doing my dissertation research, and in communities that had a lack of trust, where do you start? And part of what I was noticing was that if you could do some of what you're describing, demonstrate that you've listened and you've actually taken some action in response to what you've been told, like as a district administrator, listening to the community and actually demonstrating that you did something, that little small win of a collaborative sort of success together, we did this, builds trust over time. So I think that's actually something we've been seeing in our work around LCFF as well, right? They put the ideas in the LCAP. They fund an idea that came out of the community. That in and of itself, I think, builds trust.
Hi, Michael Butler, MPO Solutions. I've worked in this space for a long time doing program and participatory evaluation, mostly in urban education. One thing I'm kind of struck by is, I don't know how many of you were here for David Plouffe's talk. He talked a lot about the difference between support and intensity and about salience and capturing the moment. And one of the things I'm struck by in the public education space is the changes are really slow, sometimes glacially slow, incredibly complex. Schools are notoriously late adopters. Like the state will adopt standards in 2010. No district really moves forward until about 13, 14, 15 with actually enacting those standards. And some schools are just getting to them now. So like the process of change is really slow, and yet we have a kind of political logic, which is you got to make it salient, you got to activate passion, and you got to take advantage of the window in the moment. And I'm wondering, are we able to do that in public education, given the polarization? Can we find common ground and capture the window of opportunity that's here, and what is it?
I mean, I would just argue we have that window right now in the state, which is that we have some consistency of leadership, right? Like part of the problem in all of this is that we have this turnover of legislators and leaders at all levels. But we do have an administration in California right now, for example, that remains committed to these major reforms that I was sort of laying out. So at the moment, we have the possibility of actually building the capacity and continuing on without all of a sudden now trying to initiate some whole new set of reforms. So I think we do have a window right now in the state to, if we could build the resources to support it, that's where our biggest challenge is. But the leadership, I think, we have a state superintendent, the new state board, Linda Darling-Hammond is the new board president. She's very consistent in her beliefs, so there's an alignment, I think, at a leadership level that could provide us that opportunity.
Well, I'm the startup entrepreneur person, so for us, speed traction is the name of the game. It's super important, and it's not just do it, without any caution. We've done it in a very disciplined manner, and one of the things that we talk about with a lot of our partners is, the hybrid of public-private partnerships of kind of nonprofit, for-profit. It can work really well, and they can balance each other out. I think the second thing is sometimes you catalyze the ecosystem. Not everyone's going to be forward-thinking, whether it's a foundation that wants to do grants and another one that says we want to do impact investing. We started to shift to ones that want to do impact investing. It was more aligned with how they want to move forward as a foundation. It took us a while to figure that out. We burned a lot of time with folks that just weren't going to make that change. But I was like, this is where we want to go. And also the mindset changes around, folks that still think from a programmatic perspective, loans are bad and this, that, and the other. I think the other thing is, credibility to market is also about what people are hopping on the bus. And that just takes some time. And it's nice when you find people who put their money or their action to where their aspirations or where mouth is. Because these are really tough problems. It's the reason why it's not happening. So as an entrepreneur, we've learned to really kind of work with folks who want to lean in instead of trying to pull teeth. And we become, really good at kind of understanding who that is. But now it's funny because now going full circle, other people are like, wow, we passed on you, or we didn't want to work with you a while ago, but you're rocking it right now. We want to work with you. And of course, we embrace that. But it's it was important, and we wanted to work with high school districts early on. We tried in Texas, which is where we launched our first state pilot. We quickly realized, yeah, we love your model, but I'm going to tell you as someone who's on that side, the administrator, said, I don't want to waste your time. It's going to take a long time for you to get anywhere with us, and I would hate for you to burn, 18 months with us and get nothing potentially. I would direct you to go. And so that was good insight and trust that we built with them. So we've had to be very scrappy and be very focused on opportunity cost of where we spend our time and efforts. But, you know, I think that template, going back to the earlier question around, you know, how do you get alignment stakeholders, like, from our standpoint, we don't aspire to get everyone on the same page and 100% alignment. We kind of focus on the ones that can help us move forward.
And just to add to Julie's comments, I think we have a very big opportunity with this upcoming election in November 2020, where we've seen a bigger focus on public education at the local level, given the very well-organized teacher strikes that have happened, that have led to a clear understanding of our schools needing more. And our schools need more, but I think it's more spent in smart ways. And the great opportunities that Julie's talking about is that the crisis, our recession created a crisis moment that enabled very significant policies to pass, like the local control funding formula, grounded in this movement to have the Common Core state standards across the nation. And those are key reforms that, grounded in with additional money, with more community engagement, I think will bear a lot of fruit. And so I think November 2020 is key in having, will California really turn out for the national politics of stuff is incredibly important, and people will need to really turn out to have the values of a progressive nation come to a forefront, hopefully, because I'm a progressive, and so I would say that. But in California particularly, education is going to be big in 2020, and will people care enough to turn out? That's what we're putting our bets on, and can this work?
Thank you. I had a question about implementing financial literacy for the students that will be accepting the loans that you're offering. What does that look like? And then, since you're only 4 years in, what does the loan servicing model look like for those students who will be taking those loans?
Sure. So we work with a third-party servicer like every student loan company. However, structurally, we don't outsource it. We subcontract it, so we govern the entire life cycle and the policy, so that's kind of where you can protect some of these nightmare situations where they're chasing down a student who's already passed away. On your first question, which, sorry, I just skipped your first one and I now can't remember the first one, but financial literacy. Yeah, so really important for us. Because we're a technology company, we have a lot of data, and this is something I didn't talk about earlier, but you know, we're gestating a very nice longitudinal system of data that's going to get very intelligent over time if we understand what students do really well at what schools, what courses they take, what majors they do, what jobs they graduate into, what zip codes they graduate into, how long it took for them to graduate, how much did it cost for them to pay for their education. So, you know, over time, that becomes very powerful to actually give back to the students and families on the front end to help guide with data and actually real benchmark data, because right now no one knows the benchmark of undermatch or forego the opportunity to go to a better school because you didn't have access to money. No one's ever captured that data. We're actually starting to capture what that delta looks like because it's a meaningful benchmark for everyone to realize is what's the foregone opportunity. But real quick example of many that we're doing is one of the tools that we created was simply a matrix that leveraged some insights around what are institutional metrics around likelihood you're going to make it in graduation rates and realized federal and default rates. And then on the x-axis was kind of the gap from 0 to, let's say, 30,000. And we pushed this out in the field just to test it. And a lot of the counselors were really excited because it could frame kind of what they were doing in their heads around pathway literacy, not financial literacy, around schools that they want to stay away from, which is the lower left, the, you know, pay a lot of money but get really poor outcomes, predatory institutions. And then, you know, affordable schools, but, you know, other schools that are good value schools with a lot of great outcomes, and then very expensive schools with great outcomes. And so what it provoked in the field around a pathway literacy model is counselors could say, hey, this is great. And in Houston, I reference this. I know you got into Houston Community College, you really want to go, and you don't want to take out any loans, but boy, you also got into UT Austin. And if you were to consider taking out a $3,000 loan based on your financial aid package, you could actually really have a much better set of outcomes. Can we just talk about that? And so catalyzing that was really beneficial as a counselor to have a framework in place with some data. And the other side was, well, I know you really want to go to Baylor, but it's generally very expensive out-of-pocket for low-income students. You also got into UT Austin. Can we just talk about that? Because you could go for 1/3 the cost. So again, we're not out there to tell people where to go to school. We're not out there to tell people to take money. But using some of the tools and capabilities that we have to be able to give and enhance the life cycle of not only advisory, but also access to credit and really kind of provide the framework that allows deserving students to celebrate and leverage their achievement into whatever choice they want to make. It just helps kind of the process, if you will. And Prudential actually gave us a grant out of our foundation, which is designed to push pathway literacy out to the market, to everyone, not just students we fund, but students that are at any school, any high school, anywhere in the ecosystem, to, again, help the ecosystem look at things from a more of a smart money perspective than just loans, cost, you know, and other factors that aren't really kind of, like U.S. News and World Reports, for example, you know, not entirely guiding of pathways in a myopic way. So.
Hi, I've really enjoyed the conversation about kindergarten to graduation and beyond, but I'm interested if we might also look at the pre-K space and just see if you might have some thoughts on the opportunities and challenges there.
Well, I mean, we know that the governor has committed to, in California, for example, again, specific to California, but I mean, there's a commitment on at the state level to address this. We did some interesting polling, and issues of affordability is actually rates higher than the early childhood space, although I know that PPIC has shown very consistent support for that, and so take that one. But part of it is getting the public to agree and to get the legislators to agree that this is a priority. That's been, I think, a challenge, but there is an agenda that's got a lot of research behind it that suggests that this is essential, as I was saying before. And I would just point you all to some of the work that I've said at Getting Down to Facts and Deborah Stipek and her team has been doing. I think there's a real movement right now and an opportunity, back to this opportunity idea, because the governor has committed to this idea of cradle to college. And so it is a space where there is a great need, and we just need to convince people that this is the area that we need to be investing in addition to K-12. And again, with the limited resources, I think that's part of what happens, is that it's sort of seen as competing when we have the limited resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the early childhood space is gaining more public attention. I think legislative priority, especially with our new governor. But I think bringing it back to the school perspective. So I was a high school teacher, so worked at the way latter end of that. But in 9th grade, when my students came into 9th grade, the students that came in with significant gaps, right? Like even back to students who were in 5th grade, 3rd grade reading levels coming into high school, right? We know that that gap doesn't start in kinder. Actually, my partner, my husband, who runs a K-8 bilingual school, in kinder, the gaps in terms of how, when a child has gone to a high-quality preschool program and has had access to high-quality care in early education, the gap is huge between the students who have had access to it and the ones who have not. In terms of the work that a kindergarten teacher needs to do, it's one of the most important roles in the entire education system. Our kinder teachers, because they're able to assess what is that gap and can we eliminate it in kinder, but we should go beyond that, right? And really have a universal preschool program that allows us to address, to not create a gap, because those gaps are entirely created. There is no achievement gap at birth. No one subset of students is more capable than another, right? And so I believe that that is fundamentally where a lot of our energy should be spent, especially under the new governor's priorities.
Hi, everybody. This is a question for Sunwoo. Others can chime in as well. You mentioned that your ultimate goal is really not just to have people graduate, but also put them on a pathway of upward social mobility, especially with wealth creation. Some of the educational challenges that we see are a result of wealth inequality. And there are certain type of professions, I'm at risk of being chastised, I'm just going to say, for example, certain insurance companies, certain banking policies, economic rent kind of entities are where this wealth inequality emerges from. Have you given any thought on when people graduate, especially from good schools, and a lot of them get attracted by these type of institutions that are at the core of wealth inequality creation? Have you given any thought on that feedback loop related to your outcome of wealth creation?
Are you talking about students that graduate and get a job and they elect to go into sectors or work for companies that are that are
potentially
bad actors? Is that what you're talking about, or
well,
something else?
we can use the term bad actors, or they're in the market of gouging economic rent, which is not value creation for the society, but rather wealth creation for the society, or wealth creation for a subgroup.
Well, the short answer is we don't get involved with where students want to go work and where their aspirations and kind of dreams are. In fact, what's important to us is that if a student wants to be a journalism major, but they forego the opportunity to go into journalism because they got a job at the Wall Street Journal, but they instead go work at a tech company because they can make more money to pay off their loans, we're kind of saying, hey, let's kind of reprogram this so that maybe we can have a better financing option for you so you can actually stay the line and go to what you really want to do in life. So I'm not trying to bypass your question. It's just more, you know, I think we had a lot of pressure early on from people who said, hey, this is a great model, but I think you should probably risk mitigate by only focus on tier 1 schools and technology finance majors, STEM finance. And I had a very visceral reaction to that for a couple reasons. But, you know, the first thing is, look, we're trying to prove a credit model and a capability and understand that you don't have to go to Northwestern to make it in life. You don't have to be a STEM major to make it in life. And we'd like to understand every gradient and cross-vector analysis here, there, and under, side to side to be able to power the capability to take any student and understand how we can support them based on the data and the intelligence that we have. So we went wide for a reason, and I think it's a horrible way to go to market. We're Sixup, we're going to market, help responsible affordable loans for low-income, high-achieving students, but we'll only fund you if you get into a tier 1 school and you're a technology finance major, right? So that's not a good way to build a brand, not a good way to go to market. So I believe if we are, going back to your question, if we are powering a pipeline, so if the pipeline is coming from California in K through 12, and we can empower and mobilize and carry the torch forward, we're actually a pipeline for not just workforce, but leaders, innovators, creators, workers, builders, entrepreneurs, small, medium business owners, consumers, investors. So we're a great pipeline for what's going to go into the economy. And in that regard, if you get those leaders and innovators who came from these upbringings and came through this experience set, like me, they're able to affect change in those organizations that you talked about. So I think it's a good thing, rather than worry about where they go. I say go work at whatever institution you're talking about, whatever company you're talking about, and let them be the change maker at those institutions, or create a company, a startup that's going to compete with them and put them out of business. I mean, I don't know, something like that.
But as a researcher, we should follow your, let us follow yours, the folks who receive the, right? I mean, that's an empirical question that we could potentially answer if we follow them over time and figure out where they go, and do they end up promoting, in some ways, sort of working against what you were just discussing.
I mean, employers out there are all interested in diversity, right? Increasing diversity. Well, I think a lot of folks, Intel in particular a couple of years ago, realized it's not a HR issue, it's a pipeline issue. We need more students to get into the system, which is why we didn't do refi like SoFi. If you know social finance and Common Bond and Earnest, they all just did refinancing of graduates who'd already graduated from undergrad institutions and generally focused on tier 1 schools. I said, no, I don't like that model. It's great if you want to do that, but I don't want to arbitrage on the back end. I'd rather get more students in the system to the point that we're talking about here. And so if you kind of look around and look at a set of employers in any industry saying, we want to increase diversity, well, we're a great way to take that, talent, and we'll kind of incubate them, leveraging all the great work in the community that's already been done in K through 12. And I think you're going to see some real change, some real transformative change around policies and best practices and governance and leadership, and therefore, kind of deal with the root issue you're worried about, right? I think that's a judo way to do it. I grew up doing martial arts, so I talk a lot about that. But I like that model than going in and trying to tell kids, oh, I don't want you to go work for this company or that company. That to me is, we'd rather spend our time and effort on the former model.
So sort of wrap it up, and I guess to me this sort of ends us back to where we started the morning, where we were talking a lot about data, right? So you are a tech company, you're collecting all of this data. You've taken away a constraint that has kept kids from going to certain schools or not succeeded at them because of their jobs, because of the difficulty. And we're going to collect this data, we can analyze it, right? We can understand, and we can continue to innovate and improve outcomes all the way from the cradle to college. So thank you to the panelists. Terrific.